All right, ready to jump back into the world of Fourth Wing?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything we talked about in part one.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this book.
That's for sure.
But I think one of the things we need to revisit is that romance between Violet and the Xaden.
Oh, yeah, the romance. It's definitely one of the most talked about aspects of the book.
For sure. I mean, it's a wild ride. One minute they're practically at each other's throats. The next they're, well.
Yeah, the chemistry is undeniable.
Ah.
But it's also, like, super complicated.
Oh, incredibly complicated, especially with that whole mated dragons element thrown in.
Right. Like, do they even have a choice in the matter? Their dragons are basically dictating their feelings for each other.
It definitely raises some questions about free will and consent. Like, how much agency do these characters really have if their dragons are the ones driving their desires?
It's a good point. And it makes you wonder if their love is actually genuine or if it's just like a biological imperative. Their dragons are mated, so they have to be together.
It's almost like their romance is being manipulated by forces beyond their control, which makes it both super intriguing and kind of messed up.
Totally. And then on top of all that, you have the power imbalance between them. Even if their society is okay with relationships between dragon riders of different ranks, it still feels a bit iffy to me.
Oh, yeah, totally. Xaden is Violet's commanding officer, and that just creates a whole other layer of complexity.
You're constantly waiting for someone to call them out on it. It adds a whole layer of tension to their every interaction.
Speaking of tension, I think we should talk about the writing style for a bit.
Okay, yeah, the writing, we touched on it briefly before, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's clear that the author is going for a fast-paced, action-packed style.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a page-turner. You can't deny that.
Right. But some reviewers are arguing that the writing lacks depth and nuance. Like, it's all about plot and action and not enough about character development or exploring deeper themes.
I can see that.
Yeah.
There were definitely moments when I felt like I was being rushed through the story, like the author was afraid to slow down and let things breathe.
Yeah, one reviewer even mentioned the overuse of short sentences and frequent periods for emphasis.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was a bit much.
It was. Like, it's a stylistic choice for sure, but when it's overdone, it just becomes distracting.
And then there was the dialogue, which at times felt a bit stiff and unnatural.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Remember that scene where Jack reveals he's allergic to oranges?
Ugh, yes. So random, so out of place.
Exactly. It's those little inconsistencies that can really pull you out of the story.
It's like you're suddenly reminded that you're reading a book and not actually living in this world.
But despite those criticisms, there are also people who really enjoy the writing style. They find it engaging and easy to read.
Right, it's definitely a quick read.
It is. So it really comes down to personal preference. Some people prioritize plot and pacing over prose, while others are more attuned to those stylistic choices.
Okay, let's shift gears again and go back to the world building.
Sure. What aspect of the world are we diving into this time?
Well, earlier we were talking about how the war feels underdeveloped, almost like an afterthought.
Right. It's this vague threat looming in the background, but we don't really get a sense of what's actually at stake.
Exactly. But one reviewer made a really interesting point. They said that maybe this lack of detail is actually intentional. Like, the author is deliberately withholding information to create a sense of mystery and keep us guessing.
Ooh, that's a clever observation.
Right, it's like those missing pieces of a puzzle that you're trying to fit together.
And it makes you wonder if there's something more going on behind the scenes, something we haven't even been introduced to yet.
Exactly. What if the enemy isn't who we think it is? What if there are secret alliances, hidden agendas, all this stuff happening that we're not even aware of yet?
Now, that would be a twist.
Right. I mean, we're so focused on the dragons and the training and the romance that we haven't really stopped to consider the bigger picture. What if there's a more sinister force at play here?
It's a really intriguing thought, and it definitely makes you want to read the next book to see how it all unfolds.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, before we get too carried away with conspiracy theories, I want to circle back to something we were talking about before. The dragon's ability to transfer their emotions to their riders.
Oh, right. We were wondering if it works both ways.
Exactly. Can the riders also influence their dragon's emotions?
That's a great question, and honestly, I don't think the book ever explicitly answers it, which just adds another layer to the mystery of the bond.
It's like, are the riders really in control? Or are they just pawns in their dragon's game?
I think it's safe to say that this bond is way more complex than we initially realize.
Okay, I'm ready to move on from dragons for a sec.
Sounds good. Where to next?
Let's talk about Violet and her family.
Ah, yes. The Sorrengail legacy. That's a big part of her story.
It is. I mean, she's constantly trying to live up to her family's expectations, especially those of her mother.
General Sorrengail.
Yeah,
She's a force to be reckoned with.
she is. And you can tell that Violet feels this immense pressure to prove herself, not just as a dragon rider, but as a Sorrengail.
It's like she's carrying the weight of her entire family's legacy on her shoulders.
Exactly. And it's made even more complicated by the fact that she doesn't really fit the mold of what a typical Sorrengail is supposed to be.
Right. She's not physically strong like her siblings, and she's way more interested in books than battle tactics.
But she still has that inner strength, that determination.
Oh, absolutely. She's a fighter, even if she doesn't always realize it.
And that's what makes her such a relatable character, I think. She's not perfect. She doubts herself. She makes mistakes. But she never gives up.
She keeps pushing forward, even when the odds are stacked against her.
It's a good reminder that true strength doesn't always come from physical power. It can also come from resilience, from the ability to overcome adversity and stay true to yourself, even when everyone else is telling you to be someone else.
It's a powerful message, and one that I think resonates with a lot of people.
So, we've got this complex world with all these unanswered questions, a flawed but compelling protagonist, a super controversial romance, and some really thought-provoking themes. What else could we possibly uncover in this book?
Well, we haven't talked much about the ending yet,
Oh, the ending.
and let me tell you, it's a doozy.
I finished the book and just sat there staring at the last page, completely speechless.
Yeah, it's a major cliffhanger, one that left a lot of readers gasping for air.
I need to know what happens next, like right now.
I know, right? But one reviewer made an interesting comment. They said that even though they saw the twist coming, it didn't take away from their enjoyment of the story. They felt like the journey was just as important as the destination.
That's a good point. It's not always about the big reveal. It's about the emotional roller coaster we experience along the way.
Exactly. And in Fourth Wing, that roller coaster is packed with action, romance, betrayal, and a whole lot of dragonfire.
It's a wild ride from start to finish.
And that cliffhanger ending. It's the perfect setup for what's sure to be an even more intense sequel.
I'm already counting down the days until the next book comes out.
Me too. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think we need to take a step back and appreciate what this book has already accomplished.
Okay, yeah, good point.
It sparked a ton of debate and discussion, introduced us to this world full of possibilities, and given us a protagonist who's both relatable and inspiring.
And it's definitely reminded me why I love reading fantasy.
Me too. Okay, so before we move on to part 3 of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. We've talked a lot about Violet and her journey.
Her struggle to define herself within the context of her family's legacy.
Exactly. So, do you think she's ultimately successful in forging her own path? Or is she still trapped by the expectations of her family?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Hmm.
Honestly, I'm not sure I have the answer yet. It's something I'm still wrestling with.
Me too. It's a complex question with no easy answer, but it's definitely something we can explore further in part 3.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to dive back in. All right, so we're back for the final part of our Fourth Wing deep dive.
Can you believe we're already here?
I know, right? It feels like we just started talking about this book.
Yeah.
But we've covered a lot of ground. We've dissected the plot, analyzed the characters, debated the romance.
We've even ventured into some conspiracy theories about the war.
We have. But before we officially wrap things up, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room.
Oh, what's that?
The hype.
Ah, yes. The hype.
Fourth Wing has been everywhere. It's dominating online book communities, flying off the shelves, sparking endless debates.
It's the book that everyone's talking about.
Exactly. So the big question is, does it actually live up to all the hype?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. So what do you think? What is it about this book that's resonating so strongly with readers?
Well, I think part of it is the familiarity. It draws on a lot of those classic fantasy tropes that we all know and love, dragon riders, forbidden romance, a chosen one narrative.
Right. We've seen those elements before.
Yeah.
But Fourth Wing also manages to put a fresh spin on them.
Exactly. It takes those familiar tropes and twists them just enough to create something that feels both new and exciting.
And you mentioned earlier how it has some similarities to other YA dystopian novels, like Divergent, for example.
Yeah, it definitely taps into some of those same themes, rebellion, self-discovery, finding your place in a world that's trying to define you.
those themes are always going to resonate with readers, especially younger readers who are going through similar experiences in their own lives.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have the dragons.
Oh, the dragons. Can't forget about the
I
dragons.
mean, dragons are always cool, but Yarros has created a unique take on dragon lore with the whole telepathic bond and the cooperative magic system.
It's not just about, like, conquering and controlling the dragon.
Right. It's about forming a partnership, learning to trust each other, to work together.
And that theme of partnership extends to the romance as well.
Oh, for sure. Violet and Xaden are constantly being forced to rely on each other, to overcome challenges together, to navigate the complexities of their bond, both with their dragons and with each other.
It's a classic enemies to lovers trope, but that dragon bond adds a whole other layer of, well, everything.
Intrigue, drama, complications.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the looming threat of the war, the political machinations happening behind the scenes.
Yarros has created this world that feels both immersive and dangerous. You're constantly on edge, wondering what's going to happen next.
And who to trust.
Exactly.
And that ending. I mean, talk about a cliffhanger.
Oh, it's brutal, but it's also incredibly effective. It leaves you desperate to know what happens next.
Which is exactly what a good cliffhanger should do.
Right. It's the hallmark of a successful series. You want readers to feel satisfied, but also hungry for more.
Okay, so we've talked about what makes this book so popular, but I think we also need to acknowledge the criticisms.
Of course. Not everyone is going to love this book, and that's okay.
Right. We've mentioned some of those criticisms throughout our conversation. The pacing issues, the clunky dialogue, the sometimes underdeveloped world building.
Some people find the characters a bit one-dimensional, especially Xaden, and there's been a lot of debate about the whole mated dragons element.
It's important to acknowledge those perspectives because they are valid.
Absolutely. Just because we enjoy something doesn't mean everyone else will, and that's fine.
But I think it's also important to remember that no book is perfect. Every story has its flaws. It's up to each individual reader to decide if those flaws outweigh the strengths.
And in the case of Fourth Wing, it seems like for a lot of readers, the strengths do outweigh the weaknesses.
They're willing to overlook those imperfections because they're so invested in the story, the characters, the world.
Exactly. They're hooked.
So I guess it all comes down to this. Is Fourth Wing worth the hype?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, I don't think there's a simple yes or no answer. It depends on what you're looking for in a book.
If you're looking for something super complex and nuanced, with groundbreaking world building and deeply flawed characters, you might be disappointed.
But if you're looking for a fun, fast-paced adventure with a sizzling romance, a unique magic system, and a protagonist you can root for, then you'll probably love Fourth Wing.
It's a book that's meant to be enjoyed.
To sweep you away on a whirlwind of emotions.
And to leave you wanting more.
Which it definitely does.
So our final verdict. We're not going to tell you what to think. We've given you all the information, all the different perspectives. Now it's up to you to decide if Fourth Wing is worth adding to your TBR pile.
We've done the deep dive, now it's your turn to take the plunge.
And hey, whether you end up loving it or hating it or somewhere in between, we want to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
And if you're looking for more dragon-themed adventures or sizzling romances, be sure to check out the show notes for a curated list of recommendations.
Until next time, happy reading. And may your flights of fancy always be thrilling.
Wow.